Hello, and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. Hello, Warbirders. If you get some satisfaction out of listening to this show, please consider supporting me at World of Warbirds Patreon. It's only $5 a month. Many people spend more on that in a day on fancy coffee. This isn't my day job, but the more successful it is, the more time I can devote to it. There are advantages to being a supporting patron of the podcast, such as getting the episodes a week earlier, getting bonus episodes, and having a say on future content. But mainly you'll have the satisfaction of helping keep this podcast going. If you are presently listening to this through Patreon, well, then thank you for your support. Now on to today's show. Today's episode is brought to you by a generous donation from Tobias Bellick. Thank you for your support, and I do hope you enjoy your requested episode. Actually, I think you're getting your donation's worth, because this is a 3-parter, as the history of the Skyraider is just so rich. I've been looking forward to doing this one for several reasons. One is that the long operational life of the Skyraider allows me to look beyond World War II to Korea and even Vietnam. Although I love my usual era, it's going to be fun to look beyond VE and VJ Day. So many of the aircraft we look at are quickly eclipsed by jets, and so it's a rare treat to be able to look at these other conflicts through the spinning disc of a big propeller. Also, this is a first in that Tanner and I are together and simultaneously building scale models of the Skyraider as this episode is being produced. We say we are building these together, but we are actually about 6,000 miles apart. So, as I record this, I see a bunch of sprues and parts and paints and instructions off to my left, just begging to be assembled. But as this fall has been almost summer-like here in eastern Canada, it's been hard to come inside and work in the basement. There will be plenty of winter for those type of activities. All right, so I think we've had far enough preamble. Let's dive in. So, the reason that we are covering this aircraft at all is that it was begun during World War II years, and it doesn't hurt that it is powered by a piston banger and a spinny thing out in front, and isn't a jet. This isn't an act of parliament type thing or anything. It just helps me to concentrate my thinking of what airplanes are in my era. It was conceived due to a United States Navy requirement to follow up from earlier aircraft such as the Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver and the Grumman TBF Avenger. As I write that, I feel it's a bit of a shame that we haven't looked at either of those yet. So many planes and so little time. Anyway, so the new airplane needed to be a carrier-based, single-seat, long-range with high performance and able to do a dive bomber and torpedo bomber role. And boy, would it end up doing those and so much more. It's funny. The result ended up looking both like a World War II aircraft and yet having this completely individualized look. Nothing looks like a Skyraider. Perhaps one reason for this is that the aircraft was designed to perform both the dive bomber and torpedo bomber role. If you think about the carrier air battles of World War II, there were dive bombers and there were torpedo bombers, and there were the fighters to protect them. Now Douglas needed to put all these roles together. Now they had already tried with an aircraft called the BTD-1 destroyer, which looked like a much sleeker Avenger, but with gull wings like the Corsair, and 2 powered turrets and tricycle landing gear. If it sounds like it was maybe too much, you're right. Although it had decent performance, it was thought to be too heavy and too complex. They only built 30 of them, and although completed in 1944, none got to fight. Other companies had tried too. The Curtiss XBTC-1 has the look of a Grumman Bearcat, but with 6-bladed counter-rotating props. Its development suffered from a low priority, as Curtiss was already struggling with workload, and that, plus the crash of one of the 2 prototypes, doomed the type. The Kaiser Fleetwing SBTK-1 actually looked quite a bit similar to the Skyraider, and is the first aircraft I think I've seen that had both a tail and a nose wheel, although it seemed to fall mainly into Team Tricycle. It had development problems that slowed its progress down so much that by the time it was ready, the Skyraider and Martin A.M. Mauler had already established themselves. The Mauler is really the only one that stood a chance in this competition. It actually looks quite close in shape to the Skyraider, although more sleek. It was bigger than the Skyraider and could carry a third more stuff, and they did build 151 of them, and it was operational long enough to even get the endearing nickname of Able Mabel, but it was less reliable, harder to fly, and even worse, it was harder to land on a carrier, which earned it a more dubious nickname of Awful Monster. And after a decent run, it was retired to shore-based squadrons and then retired fully in 1953. So all of the above could probably deserve their own quickie episodes, especially the Mauler, so you may hear of them again one day. But in this Darwinian competition, there was only one of this class of birds left, and its long-term survival would prove that it was indeed the fittest. Douglas chief designer Ed Heinemann, yes, we heard about him in the Havoc episode, and his team started off with the aforementioned BTD-1 destroyer, and then went on a brutal editing campaign to simplify and lighten it. It reminds me of what Grumman did to produce the Bearcat, and if you remember, they even got rid of the pilot's seat adjustment mechanism, replacing it with cushions. So, with the new design, Douglas scrapped the tricycle landing gear, going back to the old-fashioned tailwheel. Bombay, too heavy and too complicated. Everything was going to be hung underneath. Gunners and turrets, gonzo. Scratch the wing dive brakes, a fuselage base one was lighter. Even the initial fuel system was tinkered with until 270 pounds had been shaved off. And they didn't take forever to do this either. The Smithsonian website states that the initial proposal was sketched out in a hotel room, and that the first prototype XBT2D1 made its first flight 4 months ahead of schedule on March 18, 1945. In order to speed things up, the prototype's landing gear struts and wheels were actually borrowed from a Vought Corsair. In under a month, the aircraft was sent to the Navy Proving Ground at Patuxent River, Maryland, where the test pilots seriously fell in love, rating it to be superior to any dive bomber yet evaluated, and less than a month after that, it was ordered into production, being named the AD-1. Heinemann had originally wanted to call the new plane the Dauntless II, but Douglas had a new policy where all new aircraft had to be Sky something. So as Sky Dauntless wasn't going to work, Skyraider was the name. The only real initial problems were weak landing gear and structural fatigue in the wing center sections and rear fuselage. These were not going to be good for a carrier-based plane, so the Skyraider team sighed and added 515 pounds of strengthening. But at least they were getting the more powerful R3350 24W engine, which would counteract the weight gain. This engine could generate 2,500 horsepower with water injection. So this aircraft was going to be competing with the new kids on the block, the jets, but the Navy evaluated the Skyraider so highly in terms of maintainability, logistical support required, and ease of takeoff, approach, wave-off, and arrestment phases of carrier operations, it just couldn't say no. And the type was already starting to show its incredible versatility. The Navy said, "Hey, Could we get 35 of those kitted up for electronic countermeasures? So the result was the two-seat AD-1Q. It carried a radar pod under the right wing and a chaff dispenser beneath the left, and had a radar search receiver and pulse analyzer. To operate the new equipment, the electronic countermeasures operator was in a compartment behind and below the cockpit that was accessible through a hatch on the left side of the fuselage. So the product line seemed fairly secure for now. This was even though the initial wartime production order of 548 machines had been slashed to 277. Even though this surely would be the end of the line, right? There had to be a jet that would do this stuff better. Not really. And the pilots and maintenance crews were loving it. The Skyraider began getting the first of its many, many nicknames when they started calling it the Able Dog. Yes, I know that was the phonetic alphabet for AD, but it really was an able dog. So rather than cutting back, 152 machines with a few refinements were ordered, and these were called AD2s. They had more structural strengthening and a new canopy, wheel fairings, and about 300 horsepower more oomph from an R3350 26W engine. They had ordered more of the electronic countermeasures machines called AD2Qs, and even one Skyraider target towing tug. As the years went by, the type seemed to become more and more of an anachronism, so much so that another nickname was made by adding SP to the AD and coming up with SPAD, which was the name of a French World War I biplane. But it was an affectionate nickname, like calling a valued and respected, yet older officer Pops or Pappy. The Navy kept asking more of the AD, and like a flying Swiss Army knife, the aircraft just kept showing its versatility. By this time, the next upgrade, called the AD-3, was ready in 1948 and 49. There were three subvariants, the first being the two-seat countermeasures AD-3Qs, the second being a three-seat night attack AD-3N with a radar operator navigator, and a third with a three-seat early warning AD-3W, with kind of a hump behind the cockpit and a massive radome beneath that looked like a huge beer belly. Well, hey, the type was approaching middle age, and it happens. Actually, the SPAD was nowhere near middle age. The AD-4 came along in 1949 and had a stronger tailhook and an autopilot. Previous upgrades had already strengthened the main gear, adding even more structural strength, tinkering with the tailwheel configuration. But this was it. The Navy had decided that production would definitely cease in 1950. I mean, it's the 1950s. Pistons, props, come on. The Skyraider missed out on World War II, but unlike so many of her contemporary sister aircraft, stuck around long enough to participate in a whole new war. Korea. And there, she really started earning her reputation as the best damned attack aircraft around. Firstly, they could haul so much more ordnance. 8,000 pounds, which would take about 4 F-4Us or P-51Ds to do the same. Skyraiders were also so bloody precise at delivering their 2,000-pound bombs on tough little targets like mountain bridges and power dams. In addition to carrier-based aircraft, Marine ADs operated from land bases in Korea in 1951. All of the ADs performed ground attack as well as the other roles such as electronic countermeasures and early warnings. During this conflict, AD Skyraiders were flown by only the U.S. Navy and U.S. Marine Corps, and were painted in dark navy blue, and it became known as the Blue Plane by enemy troops. Although great at performing low-level, close support missions, Marine Corps Skyraiders were taking a beating at such a low level. To increase survivability, a package of added aluminum armor was added, consisting of 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick external armor plates fitted to the belly and sides of the fuselage. Supposedly, the extra 618 pounds, that's 280 kilograms, had little effect on performance or handling. Night attack Skyraiders also did their bit in Korea, hitting targets by the glow of airdropped flares. Some AD-4N machines were even modified as drone motherships, directing Suicide Grumman F-6F Hellcat robot bombs for attacks on special targets. One interesting and special target during the Korean War was the Hwacheon Dam. I'm not sure of the pronunciation on that one, so sorry if I messed it up. It was a target that the US forces really wanted neutralized for two reasons. Firstly, the loss of the hydroelectric power would be an economic blow to the North. But also secondly, the North Korean and Chinese forces had been using the dam itself as a weapon of sorts by releasing excess water from the dam's spillway to create flooding downstream. Previous raids and even a B-29 strike had failed to achieve the desired results. On the 8th of April 1951, a group of Skyraiders hit the dam with 2,000-pound bombs and Tiny Tim rockets. Tiny Tim rockets weren't so tiny. They were 10 feet long, weighed 1,300 pounds, and flung a 150-pound semi-armor-piercing high-explosive warhead almost a mile. Its rocket motor was so powerful that it could actually damage the wing it was hanging from, so a system had to be devised whereby the rocket would fall and a lanyard attached to the wing would yank and fire the motor when it was safely clear. It was designed to wreck such items as bridges, guns, pillboxes, ships, tanks, or in this case, dams. But the job still wasn't done yet, and on the 1st of May 1951, 8 Skyraiders escorted by 12 Corsairs hit the dam with Mark 13 torpedoes, which weighed 2,216 pounds, that's 1,005 kilograms, and each delivered a warhead of 600 pounds, that's 270 kilograms of high explosive Torpex. Of the 8 torpedoes dropped, 7 hit, and 6 exploded, destroying and damaging the dam's sluice gates and neutralizing it as a threat for creating controlled floods. It was the only time torpedoes were used during the Korean War, and supposedly was the last time that aerial torpedoes were used against a surface target. Strike Fighter Squadron 195, which had participated, renamed themselves after the raid. Before, they were known as the Tigers. After, they were called the Dam Busters, a name that they carry to this day. A total of 128 Navy and Marine Skyraiders were lost in the Korean War for all reasons. So, obviously, production continued. Amazingly, 165 of the newest AD-4Bs were even specifically kitted out to carry a Mark 7 tactical nuclear weapon. By the end of the war, 1,051 had been built, and there just didn't seem to be any end. In 1951, the Royal Navy acquired 50 AD-4W early warning aircraft, and these were employed in the Suez Crisis of 1956, and served until replaced by the ferry Gannet in 1960. Sweden and France also operated Skyraiders. The AD-5 first flew in August 1951 and was known as a wide-body. It needed the space to carry the crew, electronic gear, and weapons needed for anti-submarine warfare. Space was added for side-by-side seating for pilot and up to 3 crew members under a longer canopy. To make this work, the fuselage was lengthened to 2 feet and a larger vertical fin was needed, and the dive brakes were left off. It seems that the AD-5 was never actually used to hunt subs, but it's not like they went to waste or anything. Kits were included to allow the aircraft to be used as a troop transport, 12 seats, cargo carrier, air ambulance, or target tug. You know, on top of the usual day attack stuff. The AD-5 was sometimes referred to as the 12-in-1 Skyraider because of its configurability. Swiss Army knife, indeed. There was also production of a more specialized AD-5W early warning versions, 239 AD-5N night all-weather versions, and AD-5Q electronic countermeasure aircraft. Interestingly, the next variant, the 86, can be seen more as a refinement of the earlier single-seat 84 rather than a progression from the 85. It had a more powerful R3350 26WD engine pushing out 2,700 horsepower and was meant for close support missions. It had modernized and simplified avionics, modernized bomb racks, as well as LABS, which was low altitude bombing system, and more airframe reinforcement, armor added to the sides and bottom of the cockpit, and a hydraulic tailhook. The 86 also had a jettisonable canopy and a pilot escape system. Notice that I didn't call it an ejection seat, which it wasn't. It was a set of rockets attached to the pilot's harness that fired to yank him out of the cockpit. I just couldn't visualize this until I found a video on the subject, and if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a video might be just worth 1,000,000. I will include the link. But for those who maybe are driving or can't stop to look, let me try to describe it using words. So during an escape sequence, the canopy would first be jettisoned, and then the rocket, which is mounted on the rear wall of the cockpit, is thrown out and up by means of a pyrotechnic piston. The rocket then fires and pulls the pilot up and out of the cockpit via straps. The system includes a set of rails to allow the seat back to rise up straight, and the seat pan is articulated to drop to assist in the positioning of the pilot to the vertical as the rocket extracts him. The parachute is rigged with an automatic opening system, which is activated after the rocket straps separate from the parachute risers. For those of you who are familiar with space stuff, the system is a lot like the escape towers used in the early programs such as Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and now the new Artemis system, which uses small canted rockets to yank the capsule off and away from a stricken and potentially exploding rocket below. I'm just pausing at my use of that verb, yank. Is that why it was called the Yankee system? I think so. The last production variant of the Skyraider was the 87, which was an update to the 86 with stronger and slightly longer wings, plus reinforced landing gear. 72 of these were built, with the very last rolling out of the El Segundo plant in Southern California in February 1957. Being the 3,180th Skyraider built. That's a pretty good number for a piston-banging prop plane finished after World War II. So, in part 2, we will look at the Skyraider in Vietnam. I'm pretty excited about this, as a few of the warbirds from my era make it into Korea, but it's a rare bird indeed that survives to fight in Vietnam. So, until we get at that, I'm going to spend a little time here with my model. Tanner's already got her wings on and started painting, and I'm a little bit behind. So, I'll let you know how it goes. Until next time.